Don't let that rusty thing touch my hull. It ruins the paint," the millionaire shouted from the deck of his $120 million super yacht. The old man on the steam tugboat simply nodded in silence and steered away. 2 hours later, an unexpected storm swept through. Waves fried the super yacht's electronic systems. The $1 million ship lost control, drifting straight toward the jagged reefs. In the darkness and howling wind, the deep, guttural moan of the rusty tugboat's steam whistle returned. Misty Creek, Maine. It was a harbor that smelled of diesel, dead fish, and old money. The sky was the color of a wet nickel. The water was cold enough to stop a man's heart in 4 minutes. On the North Pier sat the Gilded Sovereign, 320 feet of aerospace-grade aluminum. She didn't float, she loomed. Her hull was coated in a custom pearlescent white. The paint job alone cost $5.2 million. It reflected the harbor light like a mirror. She had a crew of 14. They wore matching navy blue polos with the yacht's crest embroidered in gold thread. On the South Pier sat the old Chimera, a 1945 steam-powered tugboat. She was 85 feet of riveted iron. She didn't have a custom paint job. She had a thick, uneven coat of rust, black grease, and 60 years of North Atlantic salt. She didn't reflect the light. She swallowed it. Sterling Vane stood on the bridge of the Sovereign. He was 34. He wore a linen suit that cost $4,200. His shoes were Italian leather, unmarred by a single scuff. He held a crystal glass of vintage champagne. He checked his watch. Patek Philippe, solid platinum. He had a party to reach in Bar Harbor. He had guests waiting. Guests who measured a man's worth by his crypto portfolio and his follower count. To Sterling, the world was a chessboard, and everyone else was a pawn. Elias Vance sat in the wheelhouse of the Chimera. He was 72. He wore a faded denim jacket. The brass zipper was stuck halfway. His hands rested on the wooden helm. They were the hands of a man who had worked every day of his life. The knuckles were thick. The skin was the color of old mahogany, stained with engine grease. The kind of grease that doesn't wash off with soap. It bonds to the skin. It becomes part of you. He didn't have champagne. He had black coffee, in a dented tin mug. The wind shifted, a sudden sharp gust from the east. It caught the heavy iron nose of the Chimera. The tug drifted. 2 feet. 3 feet. Moving closer to the pristine white flank of the Sovereign, Sterling leaned over the polished teak railing. He didn't ask. He didn't request. He barked. "Hey, watch the paint, old man. That bucket of bolts belongs in a scrapyard, not near a real ship." Sterling took a sip of his champagne. "One scratch on this hull, just one. And I'll own your house, your boat, and your pension by Monday morning." Elias didn't look up. He didn't frown. He didn't yell back. He reached for a heavy brass lever. He pulled it. The Chimera let out a low, rhythmic thrum. The engine was a triple-expansion steam plant. It didn't buzz like a modern diesel. It breathed. It felt like the heartbeat of a sleeping titan. Elias looked through the salt-crusted glass of his wheelhouse. He saw Sterling. He saw the silk tie flapping in the wind. He saw the soft hands. He saw the fear disguised as authority. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence hung between the two boats. The millionaire waited for an apology. Elias didn't give one. He nodded once. A short, clipped movement. He turned the heavy wooden wheel. The Chimera's propeller churned the gray water. She backed away. A cloud of thick, black coal smoke drifted from the tug's stack. The wind carried it straight over the Sovereign's deck. It left a fine, gritty layer of black soot on the white leather lounge chairs. Sterling's face turned crimson. Unbelievable. He grabbed his phone. He began typing furiously. An email to the harbor master. He wanted Elias gone. He wanted the rust out of his sight. He wanted the harbor sanitized. Elias wasn't looking at Sterling anymore. He was looking at his barometer, an antique brass instrument bolted to the bulkhead. The needle wasn't just dropping. It was plummeting, down 12 millibars in 20 minutes. A vertical cliff. Elias stepped out onto the narrow iron deck. He closed his eyes. He smelled the air, ozone, sharp and metallic, like a struck match. The seagulls were gone. 10 minutes ago they were fighting over fish scraps. Now the sky was empty. They had fled to the granite crevices on the mainland. Animals know. They don't need a weather app. The ocean was flat, like a sheet of dark glass. Not a single ripple. It was the silence before the executioner drops the blade. Elias stepped back inside. He grabbed a heavy steel shovel. He opened the firebox door. The heat hit him like a physical blow. 200 degrees of burning coal. He began to feed the beast. 1 shovel, 2, 3. The rhythmic scrape of metal on iron. Across the water, the Sovereign was preparing to leave. Her twin 5,000-horsepower diesel engines coughed to life. A smooth electronic hum. The engines were controlled by a central computer system called the Oracle. It monitored everything: fuel flow, wave height, wind speed, satellite weather feeds. It was flawless. On paper, Sterling's captain stood at the helm. He was 28. He had a degree from a top maritime academy. He wore a crisp white uniform. He had never seen a real storm without a high-definition screen in front of him. "The Oracle says the storm is tracking east, sir," the young captain said. "We'll hit a bit of spray, but the stabilizers will handle it. We'll be in Bar Harbor by 8 p.m. Sterling smiled. He looked at the Chimera. The old boat was still tied to the dock. Elias was still shoveling coal. "Look at him," Sterling mocked. "Working like a dog on a dead boat, afraid of a little rain. That's the difference between us, Captain. We move forward. They stay in the mud." The Sovereign untied her lines. Her bow thrusters hissed. She moved with the grace of a swan. She headed out past the breakwater. She left a wide, expensive wake that rocked the smaller boats against the wooden pilings. Elias watched her go. He checked his pressure gauge. Storsensepsi. Rising. He didn't untie his lines. Not yet. He sat down on his worn wooden stool. And he waited. If you know the value of an old engine and a quiet man, take a second to subscribe. We tell the stories of the quiet giants who hold the line when the modern world fails. Drop a comment saying, "I trust the rust," if you're ready for the storm. Now let's go back to the water. 45 minutes later, the light died. It wasn't a sunset. It was a total blackout. The sky turned the color of a bruised plum. The wind arrived. It didn't blow. It struck like a physical object. 60 knots, then 80, then 100 knots. The rain didn't fall down. It moved horizontally, like a barrage of liquid lead. Out in the open water, the Sovereign took the first hit. A 20-foot wall of green water slammed into her sleek bow. The $5 million pearlescent paint job was instantly scoured by suspended sand and salt. Inside the main salon, Sterling Vane lost his footing. His crystal glass shattered against a $30,000 mahogany coffee table. "Status!" Sterling screamed. "Stabilizers are at maximum, sir." The captain yelled over the deafening roar of the wind. Then came the lightning. It wasn't a normal bolt. It was a massive atmospheric discharge, a spiderweb of pure electricity. It hit the Sovereign's main carbon fiber mast. The yacht was designed to handle a strike, but it wasn't designed for the North Atlantic's fury combined with a faulty ground wire. A subcontractor in Miami had ignored that wire 3 months prior to save $47 in copper. The Oracle system blinked. Once, twice. Then, every single high-definition screen on the bridge went black. The massive diesel engines didn't stall. They were shut down by the safety software. The software was trapped in a permanent reboot loop. Digital silence. The Sovereign was no longer a ship. She was 2,000 tons of dead weight, a plastic toy in a washing machine, and the wind was pushing her directly toward the Devil's Bone, a jagged reef of granite teeth that had swallowed ships since 1712. Sterling Vane stood in the dark. The only light was the terrifying, jagged flash of the storm outside. The yacht rolled violently, 30 degrees to port, then 40 degrees to starboard. He wasn't thinking about his crypto portfolio anymore. He wasn't thinking about his linen suit. He was thinking about the old man. The pressure gauge on the Chimera hit 195 psi. The brass needle quivered. Red line was 200. Elias Vance reached for his oilskins. They were bright yellow, faded, coated in a thin layer of dried salt. They cost $42 at a hardware store in 1998. He pulled the heavy rubber straps over his shoulders. He didn't rush. Rushing at sea kills you. He zipped the heavy brass teeth. He stepped out into the chaos. The wind tried to peel the skin from his face. He didn't flinch. He walked to the bow. His heavy leather boots found the familiar grip of the wet iron deck. He untied the 3-inch braided mooring lines. They were heavy with ice and freezing rain. He didn't use an electric winch. He used his back. He used the muscle density built from 53 years of pulling dead weight. He stepped back into the wheelhouse. The smell of hot oil and burning coal was thick. It was the smell of mechanical survival. He reached for the brass telegraph. He pushed it forward, slow ahead. The Chimera didn't lurch. She leaned into the water. She pushed her heavy iron nose into the black wall of the Atlantic. Out past the breakwater, the world ended. The waves were no longer water. They were moving mountains of black stone. The Chimera went under. A wall of green surged over the wheelhouse. The reinforced glass groaned under 4,000 pounds of water pressure. Elias didn't blink. He waited. 3 seconds. 4. The bow rose. The water cleared. The Chimera shook herself like an old wet dog. Elias checked his compass. A 1942 Sperry liquid magnetic compass. No microchips. No satellites. Just a magnetized needle pointing true north. He steered north-northwest. Toward the Bone. On the Sovereign, the screaming had started. Sterling Vane was on the bridge. He was clutching a leather captain's chair. His knuckles were the exact color of the bone he was drifting toward. The emergency lights, small battery-powered LEDs, cast a sickly pale blue glow over the ruined bridge. "Where is the Coast Guard?" Sterling screamed. His voice cracked. "The radio is dead, sir," the captain shouted back. "The strike fried the primary antennas and the backup battery arrays. Everything is integrated. If the Oracle is down, we're completely blind." The yacht groaned, a horrific sound of flexing aluminum. A wave hit the broadside, tilting her 45 degrees to port. A $12,000 espresso machine ripped from its bolts and smashed through a plate glass window. The captain looked at a standalone backup GPS. It was a cheap handheld unit. His hand shook so violently he dropped it twice. "We're 312 yards from the reef, sir. The current is pulling us in at 4.2 knots. We have 6 minutes until impact." Sterling looked out the shattered window. He saw it. A jagged line of white foam in the absolute darkness. The teeth of Maine. "Save us!" Sterling grabbed the captain's lapels. "I'll pay you $1 million right now." "5 million! Start the engines." The young captain looked at him. There was no respect left in his eyes. Only the cold, terrifying realization of his own uselessness. The MBA in his pocket couldn't start a flooded engine. "I can't," the captain whispered. "I don't have a physical wheel. I don't have a manual throttle. I have a computer that refuses to talk to me." Suddenly a sound pierced the howling wind. It wasn't the scream of the storm. It was deeper, lower, a heavy vibration that rattled the fillings in Sterling's teeth. Boom! A single powerful beam of yellow light cut through the rain. It wasn't the clean, sterile white of modern LEDs. It was the warm, flickering glow of a carbon arc searchlight. The Chimera. She looked like an apparition. Her iron hull vanished beneath the massive swells every 10 seconds. Her tall, thin smokestack was belching orange sparks into the gale. She looked small against the ocean. She looked fragile, but she was moving. She was under her own power. Elias Vance brought the tug within 50 feet of the yacht's towering, helpless side. The two vessels danced a deadly, violently unpredictable waltz in the swells. One wrong move, one miscalculation of wave timing. The heavy iron tug would punch a hole through the yacht's thin aluminum hull like a nail through a soda can. Elias stepped onto the wing of his bridge. The wind tore at his yellow coat. He held a rusted metal megaphone. "Vane!" he called. His voice was steady, bored almost. Sterling ran to the side. He leaned over the ruined railing. He looked down at the rusty thing. The $4,200 linen suit was plastered to his skin, soaked in freezing salt water. "Elias! Help us! Get us out of here! I'll pay anything." Elias watched him. He watched the absolute panic. He watched the way the millionaire begged. Silence. Elias let him wait for 3 seconds. 3 seconds in a storm is a lifetime. "I'm going to fire a line." Elias shouted, "If your boys don't catch it and secure it, you're on the rocks in 4 minutes. You understand?" "Yes, yes, anything!" Elias didn't waste another word. He turned to his deckhand, Silas, a man who had worked the deck for 34 years. Silas held a brass line-throwing gun. Crack! The orange projectile flew through the storm. It trailed a thin nylon messenger line. It landed dead center on the Sovereign's bow. "Pull it in!" The yacht's captain screamed to his terrified crew. They pulled. They worked with soft, manicured hands. They slipped on the wet deck. Behind the nylon line came the reel rope, a 3-inch thick manila hawser. It was heavy. It was frozen. It felt like dragging a dead snake. They looped it desperately around the yacht's main towing bit. The bit was made of polished stainless steel. It was designed for calm marinas and glossy magazine photo shoots. Elias moved back to his wooden wheel. He wiped the salt from his eyes. "Slow ahead," he muttered to the empty room. The Chimera crept forward. The heavy hawser lifted out of the water. It shed seawater like shattered diamonds. It grew violently taut. The tug's engine changed its note. The rhythmic thrum, thrum, thrum became a deep guttural growl of grinding iron. The Sovereign shuddered. For 10 agonizing seconds nothing happened. The 60-knot wind pushed the yacht toward the rocks. The steam engine pulled the other way. The two forces met in the middle of that frozen rope. Elias watched his RPM gauge. 80, 90, 100. He reached for the brass throttle. He gave the Chimera every ounce of steam she had in her belly. The tug's stern dug deep into the water. The propeller bit into the sea. Thick black smoke poured from the stack. A flag of mechanical defiance. Slowly, painfully, inch by inch, the yacht's bow stopped drifting. It held. Then it turned. Away from the white foam. Away from the granite teeth. They moved. 4 hours later, they crossed the breakwater. The water inside Misty Creek Harbor was calm. The death grip of the Atlantic finally let go. The Chimera didn't tow the Sovereign to the luxury slips. She dragged her to the industrial dock, Pier 4, where the wood was rotting, where the air smelled of diesel exhaust and dead bait. Lines were thrown, 3-inch manila rope secured over polished stainless steel cleats. The Chimera's engine breathed a heavy sigh. Steam vented into the freezing air. The pressure gauge dropped from 195 psi to 60. Elias Vance stayed in the wheelhouse. He took off his yellow oilskins. His back ached. A dull, grinding fire in his L4 vertebra. He picked up his dented tin mug. The black coffee was ice cold. He drank it anyway. On the dock, Sterling Vane stumbled. His $1,200 Italian leather loafers hit the wet, oily wood. He slipped, catching himself on a rusted iron bollard. He looked back at his yacht. She was a wreck. The $5.2 million pearlescent paint was scoured down to bare aerospace aluminum on the port side. The windows were spiderwebs of shattered safety glass. The satellite domes were gone, swept away. Sterling saw Elias stepping off the Chimera. The fear of death instantly evaporated from the millionaire's mind. Arrogance rushed back in to fill the vacuum. It was the reflex of the rich, the belief that survival was simply another transaction. Sterling reached inside his soaked linen jacket. He pulled out a waterproof leather wallet. He produced a checkbook and a solid gold Montblanc pen. "Vance!" Sterling called out. His voice was raspy, stripped of its usual smooth cadence. "A decent job. I'll give you that." Sterling scribbled rapidly on the paper. He tore it out. He held it forward. $50,000. That covers your coal, your time. Go buy some new paint for that rust bucket. We'll call it square. Elias didn't move. He didn't reach for the paper. He didn't even look at it. He looked at the trembling, manicured hand holding it. Silence. The cold Maine wind whistled through the ruined rigging of the yacht. "Keep your money," Elias said. His tone was flatter than the harbor water. "What? 50 grand isn't enough?" Sterling forced a laugh, a high, nervous sound. "Fine, 75,000. Don't push your luck, old man. You drive a tugboat. This is a decade of your salary." Elias stepped closer. His heavy boots thudded against the wood. "I'm not interested in a tip, Mr. Vane. I'm interested in the law." "The law?" Sterling sneered. "What law?" A man stepped out from the deep shadow of the bait shed. He wore a heavy charcoal wool coat. He carried a saddle leather briefcase with thick brass locks. He didn't look like he belonged on Pier 4. "Good morning, Mr. Vane," the man said. "My name is Marcus Thorne, senior partner at Thorne & Associates. Maritime Admiralty Law." Sterling lowered the check. "What is this? A shakedown?" Thorne set his briefcase on a wooden crate. The brass locks clicked open with surgical precision. He pulled out a single sheet of heavy bond paper. "Under the International Convention on Salvage," Thorne began, his voice perfectly modulated, "when a vessel is in extreme distress, lacking propulsion, and faces imminent destruction, a voluntary rescuer is entitled to a salvage award." Thorne adjusted his silver-rimmed glasses. "This isn't an hourly tow fee, Mr. Vane. This is a percentage of the preserved asset. Your vessel is insured for $120,000. Given the force 10 weather conditions, the total failure of your systems, and your proximity to a lethal reef, we are filing a maritime lien for 30%. Sterling stopped breathing. The color drained entirely from his face. 30%, Sterling whispered. $36 million, Thorne corrected. Precise. Cold. I didn't sign anything, Sterling screamed. His hand shook so violently the gold Mont Blanc pen slipped from his fingers. It bounced off the dock. It sank to the muddy bottom of the harbor. You have no contract. Oral contracts under duress are fully binding in Admiralty law, Thorne said. We have the bridge audio recordings. I'll pay anything. Those were your exact words. Sterling spun around. He looked at his young captain. The boy was sitting on a crate wrapped in a foil thermal blanket, shivering uncontrollably. Tell them, Sterling demanded. Captain, tell them it was just a simple tow. The young captain looked at the ruined Sovereign, then he looked at the Chimera. Finally, he looked up at Elias. I can't, sir, the captain whispered. He pulled the foil blanket tighter. We were dead. He pulled us out of the grave. Sterling Vane collapsed. His legs simply gave out. He sat down hard on the oily, coal-dusted planks. He put his head in his hands. The linen suit was ruined. The crypto portfolio meant nothing here. The yacht was seized by federal marshals that very afternoon. It was chained to the dock. 6 months later, Portland District Court, Room 302. The gavel fell. $36.4 million, awarded legally to Elias Vance. To satisfy the maritime lien, Sterling Vane had to liquidate. The tech stocks were sold at a loss. The Manhattan penthouse was leveraged. The Gilded Sovereign was auctioned off by the bank to a charter company in Greece for pennies on the dollar. They stripped the Vane logos off the hull. Sterling Vane currently lives in a 900-square-foot apartment. He works as a junior analyst. He takes the bus. He wears cheap polyester hoodies. Elias Vance received the wire transfer on a Tuesday morning. Silas, the deckhand, held the printed bank statement. He stared at the numbers. 2 commas. Elias, Silas said, breathless. We could buy a whole fleet of new ships. Elias was wiping engine grease from his hands with a red rag. No fleet. Elias didn't buy a mansion. He didn't buy a platinum watch. He bought the South Pier. He rebuilt the rotting docks with heavy treated pine. He bought an abandoned warehouse in town and turned it into a maritime trade school. He paid for local teenagers to learn welding, diesel mechanics, and navigation. Real navigation. With compasses. Not screens. And he bought paint. Not pearlescent. Not custom. Plain, heavy-duty marine white. Today the old Chimera sits in the harbor. She isn't rusty anymore. She gleams, white as bleached bone against the gray water. Her brass shines like gold. Every morning at 5 a.m., Elias Vance walks down the pier. He wears the same faded denim jacket. He drinks black coffee from the exact same dented tin mug. He places his hand on the cold iron of his ship. He knows the truth. The world isn't run by screens. It isn't run by algorithms. It isn't run by men in silk ties who think they can buy the ocean. It is run by iron, fire, and men who know exactly when to stay silent. Thank you for watching this story of the old Chimera. If you believe that grit, experience, and the quiet truth will always beat arrogance and cheap talk, hit the like button right now. Share this video with someone who respects the blue-collar way of life. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story of the quiet giants among us. Until next time, keep your head down, do the work, and remember, the storm doesn't care how much money you have.